Hey everyone. Okay, a lot of things have happened between last episode and now, and I have to be completely honest. There were 4 separate things that got in the way of finishing this episode, and here they are in no particular order. First, I got sick, which ended up lasting about 5 days. I've had COVID once before, and if I had to describe the 2 scenarios, I'd say they were pretty similar. But life has returned to normal in my neck of the world, and COVID test kits are sort of a thing of the past. I'm sure I could find them, but they're not very frequent. I went from feeling totally fine to an hour later having such a blistering headache that I could barely stand up. Second, I had a death in my family. It's been rather distracting for obvious reasons. Their memorial has been posted for the end of September, so now the family is sort of aimlessly grieving until then. This one doesn't need much explanation other than the fact that I just need some time to process it. Needless to say, I've been in a bit of a funk. Third, I got writer's block. I've never consistently pushed myself on a writing project like this before, and it reached a point where I just couldn't get words on the page. Admittedly, this may have been influenced by my family's circumstances. Even working on my personal story, I've never pushed to have such consistent week-by-week progress. It's a level of commitment even people like Stephen King don't match. For those not in the know, one of his mantras for writing is to get 1,000 words per day. Well, I'm currently averaging around 9,000 words per episode. I believe this one's 10,000, so I'm throwing out more than one of the most prolific writers of our time. And that's not a brag, just an obvious hint as to why I might be getting burned out. Finally, and this is somewhat connected to the 3rd issue, but this episode was by far the hardest video that I've ever made on this channel. Even when the words finally did come to me, I was writing for Shikamaru, who's meant to be a genius. I have an original work myself that might one day see the light of YouTube. In this original work, I also have a genius. However, since it's an original work, I know exactly how the magic system works, because I made it, and exactly how each character would react to and treat each other character, because I made them. I know exactly how much each character knows of the fictional universe, because I made it. I have the entire plot mapped out with all its complexities. So inserting my created genius into my created world with my created rules is actually so easy to write that the character's truly fun to write for. But as much as some of us are fans of Naruto, there are a lot of inconsistencies to its magic system, chakra. I have characters interacting with other characters that never ever meet in canon, so there's some guesswork to the interactions. As far as we like to fancy ourselves as understanding characters like Shikamaru, that they're easy to figure out, keep in mind that he's not even a main character. As irritated as we might be sometimes for the directive or even hole in Naruto's character story, he's the protagonist. He has the most information told about him, and there's still inconsistencies. Thus, it's a challenge filling in that hole as a fanfiction writer. So all these lesser characters who get less attention are also less fleshed out, and to an extent, less complex. And it just makes writing a genius like Shikamaru extremely hard. Because he's not a bookworm like Sakura, he's just a naturally gifted character. Sakura might be naturally smart too, but it's very much sold to us that she was basically a teacher's pet in part 1 when she talks about being good in the classroom but not out in the field. So with her, I could reasonably write that she knows how the Sharingan works, for example, because she read it in a book somewhere. Shikamaru doesn't have that advantage. He's too lazy to go out reading books of his own accord. So he doesn't have that infinite wisdom that you can just ascribe to other fictional geniuses. When I was initially storyboarding for this arc, each of the Triumphant 12 were going to get 3 episodes. But I arbitrarily decided at some point that I didn't want the time skip arc to last so long, so I reduced it to 2 for each character. And this served to streamline events for the majority of characters. Though there were some, like Shikamaru, who would have definitely benefited from 3 episodes. His perspective from home allows us to connect more intimately with what was going on while everyone was away. Just as much as I felt this sort of, fear of missing out when Naruto went off to train, I felt the same for all of the Konoha 11 who stayed in the village in canon. So I didn't want to skimp out on Shikamaru's perspective for that reason. Not to mention, and it bears repeating, it is just insanely difficult to write for geniuses. I only know one genius in real life, like a real genius, and I've never been able to figure out how his brain works, and in conversations, the way he solves a problem is completely alien to my own methods. Whether it be a math problem, a spatial problem, or a relationship problem, he approaches everything completely differently from me. And it's not even a cold logic, or anything that would make him feel less like a normal human. So I can't even use him as a reference for writing characters like Shikamaru, because I can't figure out in fiction, or in fact, how it works. I'm a pretty smart guy, but there's this weird cliff of difference between myself and geniuses that prevent me from understanding how they think. Actually, there's a fantastic scene from Malcolm in the Middle, where Malcolm, a genius, is talking to this kid that's like half his age, that's so smart that he makes Malcolm look like an idiot. Malcolm explains that when he's trying to think really hard about something, it feels like his brain starts making these connections, and then those connections make more connections, and it compounds from there and gets worse and worse and worse, and it feels like a bomb is going to go off. And then this little kid says that his brain is like a beehive, where each bee has a brain like Malcolm's. So, I've done my very best in this script to pass Shikamaru off as a genius without it feeling too forced. At least, that was the plan. In other news, what has happened? Shino was unsure of his investigations. He didn't find anything concrete to support Kiba's paranoia, but neither did he find something to contradict either. Either there's nothing happening and a bunch of the Triumphant 12 are spiraling into paranoia, or the other half are really good at hiding their movements. And in his time skip time, he had some sort of cooperative traveling with Chomei. He also spent time with the Uzumaki clan, of all people, and ran interference against Ransai, formerly known as Fusion Man, and more colloquially known by my Discord members as Calamity Joe. Though I prefer Johnny Hurricane. That was also the official introduction of Karin. Fun fact about her, I actually had it written in my overarching story that she would join Konoha during the Chunin exams. I even had a line from Aki way back then in an episode during the intermissions long ago about how he wanted to drop off one of the Uzumaki children when he's talking to Minato. Well, Karin was that child. But little things in the plot change all the time, so it never ended up happening. I figure, without Orochimaru running around doing evil things, these canonical sound ninja would not actually be sound in the rewrite. Some might be, but not all of them. That's why Suigetsu was able to be part of the swordsman, because he never met Orochimaru. Although, considering he was trapped in a vat of water in canon, I don't really understand whether he was a follower or a prisoner of Orochimaru. The anime makes that pretty confusing. Anyway, I'm off on tangents already. Shino's episode was literally down to the wire when it came to finishing on time. So the next episode after this will probably be a little shorter, so I can reset and figure out a reasonable length. I know most people aren't going to complain about these overlarge episodes, but I need to figure out some sort of normalcy so I don't have nights where I'm editing until 4 AM to finish on time. Because all of these episodes are based on a plot where time is carefully tracked, it's actually pretty hard to make 12 characters' actions line up across 6 days. But the deeper we get into this plot, the more important it's going to be to align the remaining characters to that timeline. So without further ado, let's jump into Shikamaru's episode. Day 5. Sidling at the edge of the roof of a nearby shop, Shikamaru carefully watched Sakura below as she went about her day. Since learning about a suspected plot, Shikamaru's been wondering how he could go about figuring out whether it was true. If he asked one of them directly about it, they'd either lie and become more secretive, or they'd tell the truth that there was nothing going on. And all that would do is stir animosity amongst the triumphant 12 when it came to trusting each other. It was too risky to go about it directly. He couldn't believe that between trackers like Neji, Kiba, and Shino, none of them could find conclusive proof of wrongdoing. So it felt very strange that he, not a tracker, was now tracking Sakura as she went about her day. Of course, this was within the purview of any shinobi, but for him to follow up on the tactics failed by 3 reliable trackers told Shikamaru that this might not be the correct method to catch them out. Not just that, but the entire idea in the first place was honestly absurd to him. Just like Shino, he immediately discounted the idea that Naruto wanted his dad dead, or that the Hyuga heir was planning on throwing her entire family's reputation into the trash. And unlike all the rest of the triumphant 12, Shikamaru had been in the village in the 4 years they were away. He'd worked with the Hokage so much in that time that he did not see any perceivable problem that would facilitate an assassination. None of it made any sense to him. And today, of all days, Sakura is just casually walking around town. She entered the flower shop for all of 30 seconds before wandering over to the training grounds, where she just seemed to be walking around before returning to town. On more than one occasion, it felt like she turned around and looked directly at where he was hiding, even though from her distance it should have been impossible to clearly see him. Paranoia was contagious, so Shikamaru kept his worry in check and continued tracking. Eventually, Sakura changed it up, switching from a casual walk around town to a full-on sprint, vanishing around a street corner. Leaping across rooftops, Shikamaru quickly got to her view again, only for her to dash down another alley. Just to keep up with her, he now had to ditch a bit of stealth for speed. Out of the potential people to follow, Shikamaru figured Sakura would be the easiest to track. Naruto seemed more aware of his surroundings than ever before. Sasuke, too, was as sharp as ever, even without his Sharingan to aid. Hinata had the Byakugan, and he didn't want to risk damaging his relationship with Ino if she caught him. Also, he just couldn't see her being attached to all of this. There was just no way. Sakura, then, was the clear pick. But he couldn't tell if she smelled him out, or suddenly got a signal to dash somewhere as his meandering tracking suddenly turned to an all-out sprint across town. Nearly falling off a roof as he slid to a stop, he looked down to see Sakura standing in the middle of a busy street, completely still. She swayed a couple times and turned around, bringing a flat palm to her forehead to shade from the sun as she looked around and through the crowd. Abruptly, her hand fell away, and her head swung up and looked Shikamaru dead in his eyes. Ducking for cover again, Shikamaru blinks several times and counts in his head before creeping an eye out to check if she was still there. In the exact same place as before, Sakura stood with a wry smile as she waved up at him. People around her were looking at where she waved, unable to see Shikamaru, and returned to their business shaking their head. "Shikamaru," a voice startled him from behind. "Why are you following me around?" Glancing back at Sakura and then at the street below, Shikamaru watched the other her walk into an alleyway, followed by a quick popping noise. A clone. When did she make the switch? How long had he been following a clone for? Standing up straight, Shikamaru cleared his voice and turned to Sakura with a guilty smile of recognition. "Sakura, sorry about that," Shikamaru apologized. "I'm just following orders." "Whose orders?" Sakura asked with a raised eyebrow of suspicion. "You were all gone for a long time, and the Hokage is unsure of how to grade you all for future missions," Shikamaru lied. He didn't know what the Hokage was planning to evaluate them, but surely Sakura would not expect Shikamaru to use the Hokage in a lie. "I've been sent so far to scout a few of you, but you were the first to spot me," Shikamaru told her, hoping to embolden her confidence. Sakura stares at him comprehensively. Relaxing his shoulders, Shikamaru chuckles and casually raises a hand. "How about we start over?" Clapping his hand, Sakura nods. "So, it's a pretty nice day today. I mean, it's been nice for the whole month so far. In fact, the weather really cleared up when you all returned," Shikamaru said, noting the possible significance. "Maybe your returning will help Konoha turn over a new leaf. The question is whether you'll usher in a perfect season or conjure a storm." "I like the quiet," Sakura tells him, her eyes relaxing into a smile as she looked up at the sky above. "But you know, none of us are blind to our missing Jonin. How will we be prepared for any kind of sudden shift in Konoha's stability?" Following Sakura's eyes to the clear blue sky, Shikamaru says, "In light of the lessened Jonin population, I think Lord Forth has actually increased the training to reach the rank. Aside from my following you, have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Same old," Sakura answered nonchalantly, leaning against a water tank as she settled into their conversation. "Since Lord Jiraiya woke up, I wonder how that'll affect, Lord Forth's decision-making. How about you? Anything particular about your recent missions, other than obviously tracking your own classmates?" Shikamaru could hear the acidity forming in her tongue, despite how casually she acted. Smiling all the same, he continued, "I don't think my missions have been weird. I've been thinking, though, how some of our outside experiences might overlap with more sensitive local matters. I mean, I've had these missions, but how do you handle the return to this normalcy after coming home from such a tumultuous adventure?" "It really was tumultuous, wasn't it?" Sakura asked, tilting her head thoughtfully. "What I went through truly trivialized what goes on here. But some of your missions while we were all away had that gravitas the rest of us experienced too. I wonder the same for you, I do. I wonder if you're okay with this calm." "If only I could retire early," Shikamaru answered with a raised eyebrow. It was no secret how he would ideally spend his time. "Forget the missions, though. You've got to be doing something to spice up your daily minutia." Eyes narrowing, Sakura smirked. "Before, I was teetering on the edge of life and death. Now that I'm home, I'm just helping Ino with flower arrangements, and you think that's going to drive me insane. When you face the reality of death as often as I have, there's nothing more exciting than life itself. In your little sphere of safety here, I wonder if you've not gone soft yourself. Shikamaru was stunned. He was trying to probe Sakura for information, but it occurred to him now that she was trying to do the same thing to him, if not just flat out provoke him. But why would she be suspicious enough to do that to him? At least he had a reason to be probing her. Why would she probe him? Sighing and nodding knowingly, Shikamaru answered, I worry about that every day, but I think I'm self-aware to a fault, and I wouldn't exactly let that happen. Although, I bet your first night back you slept real good, huh? Yeah, Sakura answered, leaning in slightly, intrigued. I always had to be cautious, surrounded by those who wield significant power. It felt like I never actually slept until I got home. But even here, we're draped in the shadow of the Hokage, and there's this ethereal tension, don't you think? It's a bit complex, really, Shikamaru said, carefully observing Sakura's reactions to his words. Along with these underlying tensions that the Hokage's existence creates, there are those who even now stand against him. These groups that can certainly foment disorder at the drop of a hat. You're closer to Naruto since you returned. Have you noticed any oddities about him? Is he easily influenced? Oddities? I don't suppose I have, Sakura said with flair, a look of what Shikamaru thought was acted surprise drawn across her face. It's fascinating how all the dynamics change when just 11 kids return to town, though, don't you think? It's almost as if all the interactions with any of us carries a deeper meaning. Settling down into a sitting squat, Shikamaru thoughtfully continued. Absolutely. Every action and word feels like it has hidden implications. Like I said before, we need to stay discerning and subscribe to constant vigilance to keep from being caught unawares. It's pretty interesting to hear your different ideas, though. What do you think of the Hokage keeping all of you to the D and C missions? The Hokage's decisions always ripple through every mission accepted by the village, don't you think? Sometimes it feels like those larger decisions are just the tip of the iceberg, only what's publicized, you know? I wonder if someone like you has ever questioned the instructions of the Hokage. Sakura pokes, but remains outwardly relaxed. He can feel her trying to walk him down one path while he's attempting to take her down another. He finds it challenging to actually outmaneuver her. Sorry, I hate to change the subject, but something's been on my mind through this conversation. You've been away for so long, not doing any missions at all. Even if they are C and D rank, are you managing to keep everything in order while handling these missions? Shikamaru asks with laser focus for any micro movements in Sakura's face. I think everything is a matter of balance, don't you think? We've all been through our own traumas, so it's easy to connect with classmates while I'm in the village. It's a way to relax, you know? You're right. Missions in and of themselves were jarring to get used to again, but they're not nearly challenging enough to worry me for long. Sakura answers with a friendly smile. But forget about me and my easy missions. I've heard that if you're not guiding 3 kids around, you're doing A and B rank missions with the other Jonin. Yeah, Shikamaru answers with a sigh. I'm good with strategy, and sometimes it does feel like the only reason they're bringing me along is for that. The sheer skill some of our Jonin have is enough that I shouldn't be needed. I think I might do more good here at home. Oh yeah, I heard something about the Anbu going out on normal missions now. Gossip really gets around, Sakura says with curiosity. I wouldn't know anything about that, Shikamaru answers, avoiding the topic. Though we can't deny that some decisions could have unintended consequences, we all need to reassess the impact of our own decisions, right? Of course, of course. Everything we do can have unexpected outcomes, but it's important to consider all angles. Sakura carefully replies. Speaking of which, I've heard through the rumor mill that there might be some S-rank missions coming our way. Have you heard anything about that? Eyes narrowing slightly, Shikamaru wonders what she's referencing. S-rank missions are always trickling to Konoha. S-rank missions? It's interesting how this rumor mill has struck you. Have you ever realized that rumors, though, sometimes reveal more than they first seem to? I guess it's all about filtering the noise, Sakura says, maintaining her composure. Are you implying that there is some truth to these speculations about high-stake missions? Was she lying to him, or did she learn something he didn't know about? I wouldn't know. I've only been hearing word about a certain group that might be involved in, let's call them, sensitive matters. Have you encountered any unusual activity recently? Shikamaru repeated, trying to keep her on track. Unusual activity? Sakura asks with raised eyebrows. How many times do you want me to mention you tracking me around town? That aside, Shikamaru chuckled, rubbing the back of his head uncomfortably. But see, I usually rely on observation and pattern recognition. It's often in the details that you find the truth, and I've been given that Genin team so that I can have more time around the village for security measures. It was another lie, but he needed to control this conversation, and Sakura just kept asking him inane questions. Security measures? Sakura asks, amused. We have 2 Jinchuriki. I don't think security is relevant. Sorry to invalidate your job, but not even the genius Shikamaru could outmaneuver a tailed beast. Well, I've been assigned to particular sectors where significant discrepancies have been detected, Shikamaru answers rather boldly. It felt to him that she was making a subtle jab that the Jinchuriki were unstoppable, and since they were both aligned to this rumor, it could certainly be a dangerous tell. Are you suggesting that our Jinchuriki are threats to our own? Shikamaru wonders pointedly. Oh no, Sakura said coolly. Only that certain things are unpredictable, even at the best of times. Yes, the hidden threats, I suppose you could call them. Shikamaru nods in agreement. Key individuals like them making unusual moves would certainly be a cause for concern. Sakura begins before an arm slips over her shoulder from behind, followed by a giggling Ino. Sorry, I didn't realize you two were talking, Ino says as her eyes flutter recognition on Shikamaru and she glances behind, looking around. Shikamaru stands and bids Sakura a good day, rubbing the bridge of his nose. She didn't give him anything. There were a few notes of suspicion, but Shikamaru wasn't about to brand her a traitor based on obscure answers. Swallowing, he bid them farewell and leapt from the building. If there was a true coup forming, they couldn't keep waffling on this. If it was actually happening, then they were running out of time. Shikamaru had been sent on numerous A and B rank missions with Kakashi and other Jonin. It was clear that the surviving Chunin from the war were being pushed toward harder missions so they could encourage further promotions and restore ranks. He had heard about the Anbu betrayal that left them with less than half of their original Anbu team. But the village had always been so diligent with only bringing in the best of the best for Anbu that Shikamaru was concerned about how long it would take to refill the lost ranks without sacrificing standards. The first A-rank mission he was sent out on was with Kakashi and Raido. Raido generally served as a steward for Lord Hokage, so it was strange to see him out for a mission. This mission was to set out to find Kabuto Yakushi, who went missing in the night while Shikaku Nara and Ko Hyuga were sleeping on their way back to Konoha. This led them, of course, to the Land of Rain, where they were instructed to evade notice no matter what. The scarce news they ever heard of the small nation told of two superpowers in a near-constant struggle for control. During a war between the great nations, the last thing they wanted to do was involve themselves with a separate war. They would search for days, only to find him shackled and under forced employment amongst dozens of others, presumably for slave labor. Using very simple distractions, Shikamaru and Kakashi distracted the overseers away from the compound Kabuto was held in. Meanwhile, Raido used the Flying Raijin to get out with Kabuto, placing several time-limited seals as he dashed in and grabbed him. It was a clean retrieval and a very proud moment for Shikamaru to have such resounding success on his first A-rank mission. Raido was one of Minato's cousins, and was able to use the Flying Raijin as well, but by self-admission could not compare to the Hokage. This also led to a little bit of imposter syndrome for Shikamaru, as he was sure the mission wouldn't have been so easy without Raido at their side. Kabuto's recollection was that he was keeping watch in the night and several men jumped him. He felt that he was foolish and dropped his guard because that amount of unskilled opponents should never have outmaneuvered him. But thanks to his captivity, he was also able to shed light on the depressing conditions of the Land of Rain. This was the first time Shikamaru ever heard of the sage Pain. They would also do an investigation into the whereabouts of Akane Uchiha, now that the clan was all but not. Since he was taken by the Akatsuki and no one knew of the whereabouts of their hideout, they had a peculiar mystery on their hands. When out with Genma and Ko, they decided to find out if the Akatsuki had any ex-members that might be persuaded to divulge information. Their first stop was Konoha's own jails, where they would speak with Suigetsu about the new organization he had joined. But Suigetsu was completely disinterested in the information they tried fishing for. They even tried to offer his release for the information, but he laughs at the suggestion and tells them he'll reveal it only after they release him. But it was a bluff from the start. They couldn't just follow through with their offer even if they wanted. Only the swordsman got in their way during the Chunin exams, but the Akatsuki was an outfit even vaguely known before that. Shikamaru had reasoned that they were new to the organization, which meant that they knew none of the original members. This was until Tsunade told them that Orochimaru had once been part of their outfit. When he had his falling out with the third Hokage and left the village, he was instantly invited by the then leader of the Akatsuki. Orochimaru did not share his time with the Akatsuki, but Tsunade remembered that the leader was called Yahiko. Presumably a missing nin, they then went on to check all the bingo books and records of cross-village information. But his name did not show up once. And so every time they found a glimmer of light, they found nothing after following its trail. Their secondary suspicion, since Shisui attacked the village with the Akatsuki, was that a trade occurred at some point that left Akane in Shisui's hands. But even this was a challenge to follow up on. Ko, Shikaku, and even Kabuto later reported to have found no trace of Shisui at the hideout they had tracked him to. It was painful for all involved, but Shikamaru's second A-rank mission was a failure. There was simply not enough information to seek out Akane in any way. His third mission, on the string of missing nin missions, was to track down and retrieve Asuma Sarutobi. It tracked that he would be disillusioned, but not that he would necessarily turn traitor. So they went around to various mercenary troops and other organizations such as the 12 Guardian Ninja to no avail. Though the Guardians had dissolved, their members were too well known in the Land of Fire and were individually found for information. Given Asuma's family name and his previous involvement with the 12 Guardian Ninja, a bounty, if placed on his head, would be quite valuable. On their way back to Konoha, they happened across a farmhouse on fire, and dove in to aid in any way they could. It was only upon arrival that they found the family outside as a man burst from the burning building with a young child in his arms. When this man met eyes with them, they would realize instantly that it was Asuma. In the ensuing chaos of getting a hold of him, Asuma would only use distracting jutsu and flee. Though their pursuit would lead deep into the forests of the Land of Fire, Asuma would somehow give them the slip. But, at the very least, the news wasn't inherently negative. He was still helping those in need in the Land of Fire, but appeared to be working alone. Thereafter, a single Anbu was dispatched to keep tabs on Asuma. Shikamaru had also been sent on multiple supply runs to help reinforce both the cloud and the wind in their joint assault on the water. Because they were an island nation, it was so easy for them to defend themselves and essentially entrenched themselves for the long haul. Shikamaru thought the end of this war was obvious, and that meant the Land of Water losing, no matter what. To him, this was just an act of attrition, to weaken the cloud and wind as much as possible before tossing up a white flag. It was kind of underhanded, but they were outnumbered and supplied enough resources to themselves to last theoretically for years. But it was after a few months of running supplies to the deepest forces that Minato suggested to Shikamaru to aim for a higher step. His missions completed comprised almost entirely of A and B rank missions. Simply due to circumstances, he had bypassed the majority of his C and D rank mission days. So it felt unfair that he was granted these opportunities where most others would have to fight for the chance over a long period of time. He already had the favor of the remaining Jonin, and though he only technically knew fire release, he had been granted a bye, despite his shadow style comprising almost exclusively of his family's Hiden technique. Only Lady Tsunade stood in the way of his promotion, urging Minato to send him on an actual combat mission. Looking for missing nin and delivering supplies always had potential for combat, but Shikamaru faced very little of that. And it would be a shame to ascend him to Jonin with such little battle experience under his belt. After some consideration, Minato agrees to Tsunade's request and sends Shikamaru out on an S-rank mission with 2 teams. Their combined purpose was to breach the defenses of the Sound Village properly and to cripple their forces in any which way. The Sound had come to be seen as an infestation, like weeds in a garden. They were taxing the way of life for the surviving land of Earth. But they were also repeatedly poking and prodding away at the lands of lightning, grass, waterfalls, rain, and to a lesser extent fire as well. Anyone that was nearby with a decent amount of resources were getting gouged at every turn if they dropped their guard against the Sound. Since they weren't building up in a legitimate way, and because none of the daimyo had recognized them as a nation, the Leaf took it upon themselves to keep the Sound neutered, so that they couldn't keep a constant pressure on their neighboring countries. They didn't have defined borders either, after existing for 2 years. It was the least the Land of Fire could do to assist in protection of the lesser nations and strengthen any alliances that exist there. Dispatched at their earliest convenience, Shikamaru travels with 5 other men who have just as much experience as he has years alive. It leaves him feeling small and out of place, despite how welcoming they were to their team. His shoulders tightened with worry that he would not pull his own weight, surrounded by such giants. Kakashi Hatake, a former Anbu but no less sharp. Despite only being in his 20s, he had already nearly 20 years of experience as a ninja. Hayate Gecko, one of the few specialist jonin in the village. Though he had less experience and success than Kakashi, he had been the frontrunner for a variety of unique missions that required stealth and was a natural pick for this excursion. Ko Hyuga, perhaps the least experienced jonin, he had still proven himself as an Anbu, and had helped in many endeavors since the Chunin exams conflict. His Byakugan, like all Hyuga, was seen as the most infallible of the sensory-type ninja in the village, least prone to error. He had also been with Shikamaru and Kakashi on their last mission to the Sound. Genma Shiranui, a cousin to Minato, and specialist jonin, normally a part of Minato's personal protection detail. Since the mounting war, he had taken a more direct part in keeping the land of Earth at bay by helping lead border security. Shizune had been by Lady Tsunade's side, training under one of the Sannin for nearly 20 years as well. Alongside her advanced medical ninjutsu, she also had developed a more deadly form of fighting that would not perform merely as an assist. Meanwhile, poor Shikamaru had nothing to his name. No feats, no accomplishments. All he survived was a city falling on him, but that was luck. When he had arrived in the fallen Iwa city, they gathered for a moment to finalize their plan. With the flying Raijin, Genma would begin a distracting assault on the far side of the ruin. Regardless of his distraction, they would mount their offense in the night when darkness was their greatest strength. The intel on the Sound was that they were extremely small in number. There were, at absolute maximum, 15 combat-ready ninja present. But if they pulled off a perfect deception, Kakashi figured they could take out 4 or 5 people before being found out. He reminded everyone to evade Kimimaro at all possible, that he would need to be taken together. But it was open season for everyone else. Any civilians would be left alone, unless they themselves were found out, in which case they were only to knock them out. Signaling for Genma to move out, Kakashi motioned for the remainder of the team to start creeping closer. As the waning moon hung low over the horizon, it cast eerie shadows across the shattered remnants of the Iwa city. Their intelligence had slowly revealed that this was in fact a fake city, designed by Iwa to be a literal death trap. But they invested too much time into making it look real, and left a spectacular shell for the Sound Ninja to hole up in. With the grace of phantoms, Group Kakashi shifted from shadow to shadow, melting out of existence every few seconds. As ninja, it was everyone's first lesson in Academy to learn how to blend into their surroundings as they moved silently through the rubble-strewn terrain. Even in this arid country, moss had begun to grow on the destroyed wall, showing its decrepit state of care. At every moment that they stopped, Kakashi signaled with silent hands to where they would move next, as he orchestrated the careful infiltration of the ruins. Simultaneously, Genma advanced from the opposite side, having traveled the distance in less than a minute. His control with the flying Raijin was far less than Minato's, but it still gave him an advantage in traveling distances like this. Not being subtle, he teleported himself atop a still intact portion of the city's wall to attack any guards that patrolled. This side was remarkably unguarded, but to uphold his end of the distraction, Genma planted several paper bombs as he ran west across the top of the wall. After laying his full supply, he ignited it all at once and dashed a safe distance. As the shockwave of the explosion, along with its deep rumbling and obvious yellow flash of fire, hit the Sound Ninja on the opposite side of the ruin, half of them split off to investigate and evict any intruders. Though they heard the explosion a little later, Team Kakashi leapt at the distraction and dove through the hole in the wall. A shoddy wall of wood had been built to cover the breach, but it wasn't nearly as imposing, and they were able to leap right over and dodge to further cover of shadows. Inside the ruin, Shikamaru was shocked to see how little they had built up since the last time he was here. There were a few large buildings, but nothing substantial. Considering, however, that there were a network of caves beneath the rubble, Shikamaru wondered if they hid their primary forces elsewhere. If they wanted to call themselves a village, it didn't make sense to him that they'd be so consistently few in number. They did not hide together in the shadows, and each of them picked a different place to hide so that they wouldn't all be found out at once in the worst-case scenario. Shikamaru found himself in the rafters above a demolished building whose skeleton was all that was left. As he stayed as still as he could, 4 sound ninja passed directly under him, close enough that he could hear their muttering. "It seems as though we have one person assaulting us. Likely a diversion," one of the voices predicted. "Typical ninja tactics. You'd think they'd try to spice it up to surprise us." It was an odd observation, considering they did not seem to realize Shikamaru and the rest of the group were hiding right under their noses. Or in this case, above their noses. The 4 below split up and took points around one of the freshly built structures, perhaps to protect it? For some reason, one person was left behind, right beneath Shikamaru, a girl about his age. Swallowing, Shikamaru put his hands together and cast out a shadowy tendril. It weaved down the wooden post right beneath him, and he kept it a hair's breadth from her shadow for just a moment as he double-checked for anyone nearby. He had to move quick, because if he didn't gain absolute control, she would still be able to talk to her comrades. So he had to use his shadow neck binding jutsu. If he was clean with its usage, he could use it to silence her rather than choke her, but their instructions were clear. Take down anyone that he could. Nervous about failing in his first attempt, Shikamaru poured more chakra than he should have to ensure the strength of the jutsu. In one very quick moment, he took control of her body, and the shadowy arm zipped around her like a snake aiming for the neck. Latching on, Shikamaru squeezed tight, and hoped her comrades wouldn't immediately notice. "Keen?" a man asked that had exited from the guarded building. Though Shikamaru didn't know who it was, anyone with raised suspicion was worrying. As he approached her, Shikamaru could do nothing but pour more energy into the attempted assassination. A bomb set off near their wooden barricade suddenly drew everyone's attention, as Hayate Gekko exposed himself from the smoke to draw their attention further. 2 more ninja peeled away from their posts to address the explosion, and Hayate himself, allowing Shizune to blur out from the shadows and attack them from behind. But the man approaching Keen remained undistracted. In the darkness of night, it was difficult to identify whether they knew any of these ninja unless they were face to face. So it was unknown whether Kimimaro was in the fray, at least to Shikamaru. Just as the interrupting man came to Keen, Kakashi finally revealed himself to engage him directly. With all the building chaos, the man was already vigilant for an impending attack and met Kakashi equally in combat. Shikamaru snarled, annoyed that his attempt to take the woman may have been responsible for everyone exposing themselves, as Ko had also leapt into the fray to balance the field. The fighting was relatively low-key. Shizune, Hayate, and Kakashi were all quiet combatants, avoiding bombastic jutsu where they could. Ko weaved several elemental jutsu and was weaving the most destruction of the team, but Shikamaru could tell it was mostly to keep the combatants separated. Shikamaru's efforts with his shadow binding jutsu suddenly became much easier, as Keen finally stopped resisting. He hates to have learned her name before removing her from the equation. It added a human quality to his enemies that could easily cause slip-ups, considering the possible generation of any emotional connection to the actions. But as soon as he finished with his target, Shikamaru remained in cover and threw out further shadow position jutsu to trip up the ninja fighting Hayate, Shizune, and Ko. He only had to hold them for a second or less each to continually trip up their actions and allow free strikes from his allies. Catching and releasing his enemies with as much frequency as possible may have been difficult, but it was causing such interruption that they began to retreat from their opponents. Kakashi, meanwhile, had his opponent outmaneuvered with his Sharingan brandished. Shikamaru could barely keep up with the action as flashing pops echoed in the distance with Genma's fighting. He had to make sure his shadowy tendrils did not cross paths with his allies so he wouldn't accidentally trip them up, whilst simultaneously causing maximum disruption to the enemy. But with everyone jumping around and the pale moonlight barely providing enough distinction between darkness and shadow, Shikamaru was having a hard time keeping his jutsu under precise control. The one beneath him, fighting Kakashi, suddenly smacked one of the support pillars holding the derelict ruin up, and as the entire structure began to vibrate, it quickly followed with a crash down. Using the rising dust as a cover to dodge to further cover, Shikamaru created a basic clone jutsu to distract the man. He was surprised the Sound Ninja had the wherewithal to distract Shikamaru, even though Kakashi was his opponent. It suggested that he wasn't going all out. Weaving the necessary hand seals, Shikamaru conjured out a peppering of small fire blasts. It blew his cover, but he needed to help Kakashi overwhelm the man so that they could build towards a united front. The man had 2 large metal casings around his forearms and used them to block the thrown fire as he continued his dance with Kakashi. Shikamaru also knew Kakashi wasn't going all out and in all likelihood was conserving his energy in case Kimimaro showed up. In fact, this was pretty clear amongst all the Leaf Shinobi. Shizune was ultra-accurate with her strikes and should have been able to disable one of them by now had she been going hard. Not to mention the less than offensive use of Ko's jutsu just to continually trip up their opponents. Hayate, on the other hand, wasn't holding back and balanced the more defensive styles of the other 2 quite well. In a blink, Genma was falling out of the air with a kunai in hand as he expunged it into the top of the metal bracer man's right shoulder. His unannounced arrival gave him an extremely easy and damaging surprise attack. The man folded from the stab and quickly leapt away from the danger to evade further unnecessary damage. "Back, you fools!" he shouted at the others still fighting. "They're playing with us!" As one of the ninja turned to return to the building they had been guarding, Hayate lunged with his patented Dance of the Crescent Moon, carving up the back of the man fleeing. "Recall to Kidomaru!" the man shouted as his bracers began humming extremely loudly. The other ninja around him fled, beyond the building, and to the far side of the ruin where Genma had been fighting. Thrusting his hands and arms into the ground, the man conjured an instant dust cloud, and Ko remarked that through it, he had fled as well. Why would the entirety of their forces flee from their own claimed fortress ruin? The creaking of a door nearby announced the arrival of the other. "His skeleton is strange," Ko muttered, adding, "I didn't realize he looked like this the last time. That's definitely Kimimaro." "They all fled, huh?" Kimimaro observed through the risen dust. "Probably the smarter choice to make. Even if they do get in trouble later." "We offer you a chance to surrender, Kimimaro," Kakashi announced through the dust. There was little chance of a surrender, but if they could retrieve Kimimaro alive, the fount of knowledge he could spill would be marvelous for the Leaf. "I extend the same offer," Kimimaro answered dully as the dust finally began to disperse. 6 this time. You might give me a challenge." "What are those markings?" Genma asked, troubled by the contorting squiggle of markings spread across apparently the whole of Kimimaro's body. "I have no idea," Kakashi answered, shuffling his feet slowly and deliberately. He did not have those before. "They came from the center of his clavicle before the dust dispersed," Ko explained, "and with them his chakra has significantly intensified." "It's the blessing of Lord Orochimaru," Kimimaro openly tells them. "As a prime candidate for his return, he has given me the blessed seal of heaven, and I shall see this world brought to its knees through it, and for Lord Orochimaru. Shivering, Shikamaru felt a strange, hollow darkness about Kimimaro. He had met him only once before, but never before had he experienced this obvious, sinister feeling. Hold nothing back, Kakashi muttered to the team, though Shikamaru got the feeling Kakashi wouldn't care if Kimimaro overheard him. Last time he met, he outmaneuvered all three of us like it was child's play. Yes, Kimimaro muttered as a spear of bone tore out from his arm, and he grabbed it with the other hand. And how should I skewer you two-time invaders? Blitzing Kimimaro, Kakashi charged head-on as Genma appeared behind him. Twirling, Kimimaro guarded against both their strikes, as Hayate launched a pincer strike alongside Shizune, so that they had him covered across four sides. He didn't bother guarding at all against Shizune or Genma, as their weapons bounced off his rock-hard skin. Ko dashed forward with Shikamaru to bring up the distracting ninjutsu. Attempting to trap him with his shadows, Shikamaru was shocked when his shadows connected, but Kimimaro pushed through it, too strong for the young Nara to hold him. Meanwhile, Ko shot a fireball at the group, and they dispersed just in time for it to be cut in twain by Kimimaro, who answered with a flash of hand seals followed by a waterfall prison jutsu. A sudden vortex of water sucked out of the air around them, twisted into being as it curled around Ko and locked him within its confines. Water style, running water spear! Kimimaro shouted again before Kakashi could intercept his hand seals. As Shikamaru dove for cover, a 10-foot spire of water shot out of the ground where he had just been standing. As the remnant water collapsed on itself and rolled over Shikamaru, Kimimaro knocked away his melee distractors and followed up with Earth-style quicksand jutsu. The previously hard ground that Shikamaru laid on turned to mush, and though he didn't sink in at first, he felt its suction immediately. If he tried to get up fast to rejoin the fray, he knew he would just sink in faster, so he would have to carefully remove himself from the danger. Meanwhile, Shizune threw several chakra-charged hands at Kimimaro, growling at their ineffectiveness. It's as if bone covers every inch of his body! I can't get at his muscles underneath, she complained, leaping for distance and to rearrange her strategy. Retreating as well, Kakashi dashes to Ko's side while the other two try to keep Kimimaro busy, and Kakashi dispels the watery prison surrounding Ko. As he drops to the ground and coughs for breath, Kakashi turns and conjures his chakra in a concentration of lightning in his palm. Genma blinks around Kimimaro, almost faster than the latter can keep up with, despite the fact that his taijutsu is having absolutely no effect on the man. As he disappears next, he had been blocking the view of Kakashi, allowing the copycat ninja to cover the distance in a heartbeat without interruption, and stab his Raikiri into Kimimaro. Skin tears, bone breaks, and blood gushes as they finally land an injuring blow on Kimimaro. Unfazed by the attack, Kimimaro instantly counters with bones launching from his body at all angles, forcing everyone to retreat to safety. His offense is his defense, Shikamaru mutters as Shizune helps him from the quicksand trap, and they reconvene before another clash. He's as fanatical in his devotion to Lord Orochimaru as he is powerful, Shikamaru continues, kneeling behind his more combat-prepared allies. Taijutsu, and even Kenjutsu seems entirely ineffective. No time to talk! Ko shouts, weaving signs and conjuring a whirlwind of dust around Kimimaro as if that were going to slow him down. With so much extra bone, that's as tough as it is. It must be pretty dense, Shikamaru keeps muttering, diving aside yet again as a bony whip flies from the whirlwind, followed by Kimimaro walking from its clutches. His markings have vanished, and his skin has turned darker. He's grown a strange tail, and bones have begun protruding from every body part. Watching carefully, Shikamaru sees Kakashi land a successful uppercut, but Kimimaro doesn't even take a step backward from the strike. "Ko!" Shikamaru hisses. "Do whatever you can to soften his ground." Bone isn't that heavy, but that's when weighed from a normal human body. Kimimaro's is strong and dense, and he can grow it at will to cover his entire self. Shikamaru figures he weighs at least 100 pounds more than he looks. If he steps on quicksand, as he had just done to Shikamaru, he might sink in instantly. "Do you know how Orochimaru died?" Shikamaru shouts at him suddenly, pulling Kimimaro's focus slightly. "He was beat up by an old man." Everyone remained blurry on the details, but it was a claim to fame that the Tsuchikage kept bragging about, that he destroyed one of the Leaf's Sannin. "You know that guy. I hear you couldn't even take him out." "What are you doing?" Ko asked him, confused by the strange taunts. "How weak are the sound that they can't even kill one old man. If he blinks too fast, he throws out his back, and the great Orochimaru died to that? You will not besmirch Lord Orochimaru's name," Kimimaru growled, shoving Genma down and conjuring a great spear focused entirely on Shikamaru. "Earth-style quicksand jutsu!" Ko shouted as the dirt rippled beneath Kimimaru's feet, and he suddenly plunged to waist-deep into the muck. But this left him still unperturbed as he wound back the spear aimed for Shikamaru, interrupted just in time by Shizune, who kicked dust in his face and dove onto his arm to hold back the spear. "Kakashi, end this!" Shizune shouted, barely able to hold down Kimimaru's one arm with her whole body. Pulling Kimimaru's other hand up behind his back, Genma also encourages Kakashi to get it over with. Diving in with a second Raikiri, Kakashi smote Kimimaru in the chest with a clean strike. As Kimimaru recoiled from the impact, Hayate drove his sword in to be thorough, to make sure the damage was done. For good measure, Shikamaru, Kakashi, and Ko followed up with a combined fireball on his still exposed body. Though still alive through it all, Kimimaru leaned forward, his head bowing from the damage he had taken. "Back!" Kakashi ordered, glancing up to see the return of the sound ninja that had fled. Now returning in full force, they finally outnumbered Team Kakashi nearly 2-1. "We did our damage. Retreat! Hayate, Ko, cover our exit. Genma, get Shikamaru out of here. Shizune, on me!" Kakashi shouted as the team collapsed into pairings in their retreat. Genma barely touched Shikamaru, and the two were suddenly standing atop the wall and looking down at the carnage they had managed to inflict. "Wait!" Shikamaru urged Genma as they knelt behind cover and observed the sound ninja. As the lesser members gave Team Kakashi a chase, a grouping of about 6 people stood around Kimimaru as he slowly pulled himself out of the ground. From their distance, Shikamaru couldn't make out what was being said. "Urgh!" Kimimaru suddenly retched, and a large white thing pooled out of his mouth like slime. "What in the..." Genma muttered before a lackey jumped them, and him and Shikamaru were forced to continue their flight. Dashing across the holy terrain, and further from the ruin, Shikamaru glanced back at what he could no longer see. At what he could never unsee. What was that? Inoichi stood at the entrance to the high-security wing, looking through the window in the door at Lord Hokage with his head bowed as he looked down at Danzo. Inoichi wondered what Lord Forth's interest was in the old man, who had not spoken a single word since being recaptured. At the Hokage's behest, Inoichi had to deny access to all, the jails and any of its prisoners. Even the drunks that were brought in just to sleep it off weren't allowed to have visitors. Whoever came to pick them up had to wait outside. But Inoichi saw no harm in anyone coming in to, quite frankly, talk to anyone. He had even turned away Naruto 3 times, so far that week, and every time he asked who Naruto wanted to see, Naruto would just tell him to never mind as he turned to leave. Not 5 minutes after the Hokage arrived today, Naruto arrived yet again, and for the first time since attempting entry, he told Inoichi that he wished to see Danzo. Why Naruto would have any interest in speaking to a repeat criminal like Danzo was beyond Inoichi's understanding. While he watched his Hokage through the window, he saw Minato pull out a folded paper, and his lips started moving as if Danzo was paying him any mind. He waved the paper around a few times before tearing it in two and searing it to ashes with a rapid-fire jutsu. Squinting at the action, Inoichi wondered what the Hokage had just burned up, even if it was not his business to know. In an instant, Minato's head swiveled to Inoichi, catching him off guard. Of course, the Hokage would know he was watching. Slightly embarrassed, Inoichi turned away from the door, only to see Lord Forth standing right in front of him. "Inoichi?" Minato asked curiously before his face hardened, and he vanished again. Appearing inside his own home, Minato sighs deeply as he looks around at the dusty furniture. Neither him nor Naruto had been spending any real time at home lately. Appearing himself, Naruto looked up startled at Minato. "Have you been working on your sensory technique?" Minato asked him with a smile, wondering how Naruto didn't sense him before arriving. I... Naruto mumbled, and Minato could sense his son's bristling emotions as goosebumps rose from his bare arms and his eyes widened. Minato, once warm and nurturing, had hardened over the years into a man marked by the rough edges of loss and resignation. His once soft eyes now carried the weight of a harsh reality he had to endure after his son disappeared. Minato's heart, which once brimmed with hope, had become a fortress of stoic resolve. Naruto bears the scars of a forced independence that stripped him of the carefree days of childhood. His experiences, fraught with survival and solitude, have shaped him into a person who now navigates the world with a bold, imposing demeanor. His childhood memories had become fragmented, overshadowed by the harsh lessons learned in his absence. Minato searches Naruto for the boy he once knew, now looking at a young man whose presence both disturbs and fascinates him. Naruto, on the other hand, gazes at his father with a mix of longing and wariness, trying to reconcile the man before him with the memories of the father he once loved. Caught between the pain of their collective pasts and their uncertain future, neither knows how to bridge this clear gap between them. Minato instinctively wants to reach out, but the hardened shell that's built over the years makes him hesitant. Naruto's inclination is to retreat, his found independence making him wary of his dad's vulnerability. The old warmth that once defined their relationship is now overshadowed by the complex, raw emotions they both carry. In silence, they stand in a storm of conflicting feelings. Any movement is tentative and awkward. A handshake feels too formal, but a hug too intimate. Each moment stretches out, filled with the weight of unspoken words and the struggle to reconnect. In this fragile space, both grapple with the ghosts of their past, striving to find a way to fill the void that years of separation have carved between them. Swallowing hard, Naruto opens his mouth to speak at long last, but holds it as he sees his dad's watering eyes dry and his brow furrowed into seriousness. "Naruto," Minato said, walking towards him, "where have you been in these last 4 years?" His fox-like feral reaction snaps into action, and Naruto lunges forward, catching his dad's left wrist. "You're slower than me?" Naruto asks, his voice laced with suspicion. "I'm not left-handed," Minato told him, annoyance building to anger. Releasing his dad, Naruto sighs and leaves the house, sharing no further words, dejected all over again. And that's the end of today's episode. I apologize if it didn't meet the same quality of my other episodes. Like I said, my head's just Not in the game for this one. And if it did meet the quality, then I'm just gaslighting myself. My version of Kimimaro isn't sick, and he knows more than his Kekkei Genkai in terms of technique, so he's pretty hard to spot the weaknesses for. I would argue that he could be perturbed by someone insulting Orochimaru in front of him, and that was just a logical deduction made by Shikamaru based on how he spoke about Orochimaru up to that point. I also had that insane conversation between him and Sakura at the start, where they were trying to probe each other for information. That was easily the hardest part of this episode, just because it was really hard for them both to be clever, as well as keep it ambiguous as to who won the exchange with the correct information. And of course, the ending, with Minato again visiting Danzo, and even Naruto showing up and attempting the same, not to mention the tumultuous reunion the two had at home. So a few things I wanted to provide down here for clarity. Raido Namikaze, Genma Shiranui, and Iwashi Namikaze. Because the Namikaze clan exists in a form beyond Naruto and Minato in my rewrite, I wanted to give them more active members within Konoha. In part 1, during the Chunin exams, I had a Namikaze Anbu get taken out by Shisui before he made it to the stadium. But there are a fair few others. For those of you in the know, these 3 specifically were the special team trained by Minato in canon to be able to perform the Flying Raijin Jutsu together. None of them come from significant backgrounds, so all I did was expand them into the Namikaze clan. You'll notice that while Raido and Iwashi now have the Namikaze surname, I've chosen to keep Genma Shiranui. Much like the Uzumaki clan, the Namikaze clan have found various people eager to claim their Hiden technique. So, Genma has simply taken his mother's name to help keep the family safe. Though, for clarity, if I haven't said this yet, that's not why Naruto is still named Uzumaki. He's Uzumaki named by Minato to honor Kushina's sacrifice. A little bit of a hat tip here to Clash Bluelight in my Discord for the suggestion of adding a few more Namikaze members a long, long time ago. Also, while writing this episode, I found an interesting connection between the 5 great nations. I mean, I always knew about this in individual terms, but I'd never connected them all together. Each great nation has an elite group. The 12 Guardian Ninja, the Kinkaku Force, the 7 Swordsmen, the Puppet Brigade, and the Explosion Corps are all similarly elite groups from each of the nations. I found that very interesting, and something that made me think of other potential rewrites that could have those groups as the centerpiece. Finally, this last bit is a toughie to share. I barely managed to complete this episode on time, and with my life stresses plaguing me, I am going to take 1 more week off. I just need a little bit more time to find my center, and hopefully return as strong as ever. So I ask for your patience in this time. I don't want to fall into a habit of uploading once every few months, which is why such long breaks are challenging for me and why I wanted to upload this episode now. When I'm not reading manga, I'm playing video games, and both are super addicting for me, especially in these times of personal stress, where I need an escape. So long breaks might spiral me into a nerd fest if I'm not careful. In other words, my productivity plummets if I let myself get too into a story or a game. I remember when I read Bleach for the first time, I was house sitting for my brother, and his computer was so terrible that it couldn't run any games. Like, this is at the dawn of League of Legends, and it couldn't run League of Legends. And let me tell you, the first version of League of Legends was a very, very easy game to run on most systems. So, at the time, I opened up a browser window and just started reading Bleach. And I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours, because I just pressed on and on through the story, obsessed with it. That's how I am with stories. Novels, comics, manga, it doesn't matter. I can't put the book down. If the story's good, all other things in life take a back seat for me. Anyway, that's enough for today, because I'm pretty sure if it's actually possible, this is by far my longest episode to date. I meant to shorten it up a little bit and try aiming for like a consistent 50-minute episode, but sometimes I rant and sometimes I really want to capture the mood of a situation, like the end of today's episode, so I embellish sometimes. But anyway, that's all for now. The sky's the limit.